Podcasts are exploding right now. And before we get to the numbers, let's talk about why. Podcasts are insanely valuable, not just from a human to human perspective and an entertainment perspective, but also from a business perspective. And that's because a podcast can eliminate all of your marketing, meaning it can do all of your marketing for you. And that's what we're talking about here today in this workshop called How to Launch a Podcast for Your Business. I'm Ryan Sullivan, founder of Podcast Principles. I've been doing this for businesses for over 6 years. This is all we do. So before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button and a like on the video if you like it. And right now we're going to get started with the numbers, meaning the amount of podcasts being launched versus the amount of podcasts out there. Let's get started.
The reality is podcasting has never been more popular. I won't get political, but you guys know this last election, there was a lot of podcasting, podcast clips, and podcast interviews. And so not only is podcasting culturally massive right now, but there's also a lot of businesses with podcasts. And I mean, there's radio, over 70% of radio stations have podcasts, right? They realize that the future might not be FM, right? Maybe it's going to be podcasting. In terms of the numbers, there's 3 to 4 million podcasts out there right now. Podcast launches have gone down from 2020 to now, right? So it's about 70% fewer podcasts being launched. At the same time, 90% of podcasts fail, most of them within a 1 to 3 year period. That means whatever niche industry or location that you are in, most likely somebody started a podcast and then stopped. So this is your opportunity to start your podcast. And I will touch on the technicals and the lighting and audio and video as well, which is important. But the time is now, folks. I mean, podcasting is not getting any more popular. It's also very easy to start. So why would we do that? Why would we podcast? 2 reasons. There's 100 of them, but I'll just give you 2. Number 1, generate more revenue. Don't we love revenue? Let me see some head nods. Give me something if we love revenue. Yeah, that's what we love. That's it. Hey, man, business comes down to P&L. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to my accountants out there. I don't know what you do, but I know it's important. So number 2, we got build an audience, right? So we want more revenue and we want more people. I don't mean an audience of everybody. I mean, if you sell farming equipment, I want your audience to be farmers, right? So it's completely relevant. And we have to move, right? As you elevate in business, I just hired a business coach. Guess what? Way more expensive than I wanted it to be. It's way more time than I wanted it to be. All those things, right? But I know I got to move from working in the business to working on the business. And podcasting gives you that ability. You get to move from a content creator to a business owner. In this case, this is a podcast right now. I have my camera going off to the side. Novo is recording this. I can give this recording to my team, right? And they will go ahead and post-produce and release everything for me. So all I have to do is be the person on camera, and I can have my team do everything else. So podcasting enables you to go from the, oh my God, what do I post today? Wait, I got to get a caption. I got the picture, and then I got the no. Record for an hour, cut it up, be the talent. That's what I want you to be, especially as a business owner. What that means, a little bit more in depth here, a little bit more marketing, is you go from the entire funnel. So meaning you're in charge of telling people who don't know who you are. You're in charge of getting them to trust you, and then you're in charge of closing them. We want to take you and just have you at the top of that funnel where you're just the one bringing them in, and then you can outsource the rest. That's an ideal way of looking at it. So let's get into some examples, right? How does this actually look in reality? What do I actually do? Because I know the opportunity, and shout out to you, Chris. I'll make sure I get to that too. I definitely have a lot of tips there. I know the opportunity. I know why I would do this, right? Okay, so then how? What type of show do I want? Well, there's a few ideal types of podcasts for businesses. The first one is the interview show. That's your standard podcast interview, right? Now, there are ways to monetize that. Shout out to my friend Elena, our client Elena right there, EVs for Everyone. She has the #1 podcast in the electronic vehicles industry. And as I talk through this, you're probably going to sense a theme, but I'm not going to say anything about it until the end of this slide. But she has a #1 podcast in the electronic vehicles industry. She's turned her podcast now into a full-time job. She left her job as a VP to do this podcast full-time. I can't take the credit. I just did the production and a little bit of consulting. But that is one example of an interview show. Then we have Mark McLeod, the Startup CEO show. He's a VC. He's an investor. He truly loves talking about startups. So he started a podcast about startups. Really simple. And he's on, I think, 50 or 60 episodes. He's never skipped a week. Does he have to podcast? No, he's a multimillionaire. He doesn't have to podcast. He wants to podcast. He loves it. Then we have the Solo Dolo. Okay. Shout out to Kid Cudi. And that is, are you a crazy person? Meaning, can you look at the camera, nobody else is around, and you record to the camera? If you can do that, especially if you can do it naturally, if you ever find yourself just doing a video like this and you're about to post it on the gram, this podcast might be right for you because you can talk to the camera, meaning you can talk to the person on the other side directly, right? So then that's my friend Shelby right there, Damn Good Marketing. By the way, fantastic marketing podcast for small businesses. And that's what she does. Some of her episodes are interview, and the other one she gets on, this is what she says, so you can quote me. Hey, y'all, what's going on? Today I'm going to talk to you about, my struggle of hiring this person in my business. That's how it starts. She's just talking to you open and honest. She has 10,000 downloads in the first year, broke our downloads record. Then we have co-hosted, right? Wealth Warehouse. This is our longest standing client that we have, over 100 episodes. And I'm not going to show you their results yet, but we're going to get to their results. And it's one gentleman, Dave, who his client, Paul, he recruited Paul, who was the client, as the co-host. And now they've been going for 100 episodes. And then finally we have Bounce, my friend Molly and Claire, two friends who started. One is design and the other's product. And that's what they love exploring. Difference between design and product. So, okay. How do I go ahead now and make money with this thing? Because I know why I'm going to do it. I know what I'm doing. I know I'm going to be the talent. I kind of know how I'm going to do it. And then we got to figure out how we're going to monetize. Okay. So there's 4 ways to monetize a podcast. For a business owner, especially a small business owner, I would recommend you be your own sponsor. So you sell your own products and services on the back of your podcast. Now, if you already have a massive audience, I can totally understand sponsors. If you love Novo, I can totally understand having affiliates, right? But for the standard business, if you want to use this to generate more business for your business, then we're going to need to be our own best sponsor. And I've seen this before. Companies get into podcasting. They're like, oh my God, this is so fun. And then they're like, I want to get a sponsor because like my friend has a sponsor. And then, but at the same time, they're like, yeah, but we need more revenue. Okay, so why are we creating another business that's literally selling sponsor spots on our podcast rather than just promoting our own business? So that's what I would say. If your business is that good, if you are that good, if your results are what you say they are, then just promote your own products and services. And in a deeper way, this means you actually don't have to promote any of your products or services. You just educate. So you get on, you do things like this. Like I said, this is a podcast. This is the podcast that I will put on my podcast for prospects to listen to. And then they'll go, oh, this Ryan guy, he's like kind of got a beard. Like he seems cool, but he's not trying to sell me on his service. He's just showing me about podcasting. That's what makes people want to buy, but at least it gets them interested. Now we have a whole marketing funnel around this podcast that guarantees that they become a client, right? And we can talk about that in a little bit more depth. I can kind of skip this slide, but this is really it, right? So your own products or services, create an educational podcast. And when you educate the people, that's what intrigues them. If you give advice on your podcast and in your content that works, The key is it has to work because we've all made little ebooks and little PDFs that nobody follows. And I've been doing this for a long time, so I've made many of them. It doesn't matter if it's a beautifully designed PDF. It doesn't matter if it's an 18-minute educational instructional video from a beautifully designed lead magnet. The only thing that matters is the advice you give actually works. Because if they take your free advice, they're going to take your paid advice. So that is the monetization side, and we can go deeper into the ROI. All right, so let me give you guys a little bit of context here. This is Dave and Paul. Wealth Warehouse is the podcast I mentioned before I get to the results. I just want you guys to hear from them. They're a client, but they just do it. They do it every single week, and this is a couple minutes on, okay, what does the podcast do for you? So I'll click play real quick, Steph, and just let me know if you can hear it.
Yeah, we teach. We're educators, and I think the podcast is so it serves so many different purposes. One, it basically Paul and I were talking every week anyway. We're like, well, why don't we just carry this conversation onto Zoom, hit record, and then publish it, and it's out there permanently, And then the biggest thing this did for me was, like, until I had my own content, and Paul had his own content in this podcast, what were we doing to educate people? We were sending them to somebody else's content.
Right.
And I had this experience before where I sent somebody to somebody else's content, and they ended up doing business with that person. And I was like, well, this is messed up, man. Like, I'm the one that introduced you to this. Like, come back to me. But, it was my own fault. I sent them to that content because I didn't have my own. Now we have our own content, 100 episodes. Basically, any question somebody has for us, I can point them to an episode and say, hey, here's the short answer. For the long answer, the 30-minute answer, go check out this episode. And man, it's a time saver. It's something that our clients can pass on to their network, so they don't have to be the expert on explaining this concept to their friends. They can just say, go listen to these guys. And I've had multiple people contact me, even guys I went to college with over 20 years ago, I haven't talked to in 20 years. They contact me and they're like, Dave, one of my buddies out here told me about this podcast. I started listening and I recognized the voice. And, so he heard about it from some random dude that I don't even know. So in Germany. So
wow.
It's, I mean, the way that it spreads, and just having your own content you can point people to instead of having to direct them to somebody else's is huge for credibility, marketability, and just organic growth of your business.
There we go. Wealth Warehouse. Also, this is a podcast. This is me interviewing my two clients on my podcast. So you can have an entire podcast where all you do is interview clients. I mean, that's basically a version of what Novo is doing. They're saying, hey, we have all these clients who have all this knowledge. Why don't we have these clients with knowledge bring that knowledge to all of our other clients? And then we'll build a sense of community. So now my clients are my guests. My clients are my co-hosts. Whether that's Shelby from Damn Good Marketing, whether it's Dave and Paul, they all come on every other month. And I release these clips from this episode to my audience. And my audience goes, well, I want that, right? And then maybe they'll book a call, right? So overarching theme, right? The highlight is podcasts are, number one, not what you think they are, right? They can be anything. In this case, this is a YouTube video of a client interview. And then number two, it can be client interviews. I think this was one of the Q&A questions down below. Can you do multiple formats? Yes. I can do co-hosted episodes with my GM. I can do co-hosted or client interviews, and then I can do solo. And that's all under the umbrella of my podcast. And now, am I also trying to get 1 million views on YouTube? No. You can't have your cake and eat it too here. The podcast does one thing really well. But what happens is I release these clips, some of them solo, some of them co-host, some of them client interview. And from those clips, that is 90% of all the marketing I do. If you go to my LinkedIn account right now, and you go to all my posts, 90% of those posts are directly from my podcast. And we've generated probably upwards of $1 million of revenue organically, zero paid, all from podcast content using podcasts, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So that's it. The only other thing I wanted to show you was the results in this case of Wealth Warehouse, which they just hit 100,000 downloads. I actually have a plaque. You have to create plaques for your clients, by the way, folks, if you don't have awards. So I go, Shelby hit 10,000, give her the 10,000 downloads award. These guys hit 100,000, give them the 100,000 downloads award. I don't care if you have an ice cream shop. If somebody has bought 45 ice cream cones, you give them the 45 ice cream cone award, right? But yeah, Steph, I think this would be a good time to go into Q&A unless you want me to share a couple more slides, but I feel like you get the drift, catch my drift.
I think there's a good bit to go through here. So let's, we can
Okay.
I will start at the top, and then y'all, if you'd like to take off your microphone, or sorry, I keep saying that, turn on your microphone or your camera, feel free to do that, keeping in mind that it's recorded, so your prerogative. And first question I see, what makes a good podcast?
Answer is it depends, because it depends on the context. But I think what this question is like, what makes a good podcast episode? And so if you want the answer to that, I would say it's the opposite of anything you wouldn't listen to. Or right? So let's look at it like this. If you click on a podcast and it sounds like, all right, guys, today we have the show. Okay, if it just sounds like nobody knows what's going on, right? Then they're going to click off. If it takes 6 minutes to finally ask the first question, and the first question is, tell me about yourself, it's over, right? We don't have a plan. So have a plan. If I'm interviewing my client, I'm not talking about 100 things. I'm talking about not my service, not my product. I'm talking about my client's transformation. What made you want to start with me for my SEO services? What made you want to, start an email list? If that's what, say, imagine I help people start email lists. I'm just talking about their situation, right? So every single episode has a different plan to it, but you definitely want to have a plan going in.
Okay. And then can you give us tips on how to identify our audience?
Yeah. So what I would suggest is some kind of brand strategy. So every business needs a brand strategy. That brand strategy will influence every single thing, from the copy to the fonts to the text to your communication to your DMs, right? So I like to work with businesses who already have a brand strategy, which is not a marketing strategy. So those are kind of 3 different things. Brand strategy, marketing strategy, podcast strategy falls under that, right? But if you want the quick tip, how do I determine who my audience is? Do you have one client? If you have one client, then you map them out. Age, demographics, psychographics, and you create a persona of that one client. So then hey, well, our demo is kind of like 35 to 45-year-olds who don't have a marketing title, but actually, do control most of the marketing at their company. Their CEO is probably older, probably doesn't understand podcasting, right? And so I'll literally just take my Dave and Paul, for example, they'd be one persona. I have another client who's a law firm. They would be another persona. And I would build these personas. And by doing that, you also identify what those pain points are for each of these people, right? Pain points for Novo is, I need a business bank account, but I don't want to leave. Like, I'm work remote anyway, so I need a remote business bank account. Okay, now what are my options? Oh, Novo is really easy for me to sign up. I can send money straight from there, right? It's like they have to figure out, all right, Novo's not going after Fortune. Maybe they're not going after Fortune 100. Okay, well, that's why their content is angled towards SMBs and small business owners, right? So the easy way is take a person who's already a client, turn that into a persona, and then map out their pain points and solve those pain points.
Thank you. That was Jessica.
Shout out to Jessica. Appreciate you.
I forgot to start there. Sorry. And then I'd asked there if the audience was a mix of current or prospects, current and prospects, or if you would put podcast content more towards one or the other?
You get to decide where you want your podcast to be positioned. There is a world where it can be a mix of prospect-based content and client-based content. What we do is we stratify it. So I will have a certain percentage of top of funnel content, which basically just teaches you what this is all about, right? So if anybody in this call right now doesn't have a podcast, I have certain content that just speaks to people who don't have podcasts. And in that content, I'm just doing what I'm doing here today, which I'm showing you, here's the possibilities, right? And then so that's how you can kind of, you get to decide, right? And this is, this is like a 2 or 3 month strategy where we're figuring out where in the funnel we want the podcast to fit. So the quick answer is it can literally do it all. It can help your clients, it can help your prospects, but the more you make it do, the harder it is.
That makes sense. As far as you're saying about like strategizing and focusing in as well. That we get to the technical question. Lisa wanted to know, what lighting are you using?
Yeah. So this
visuals are. Yeah.
What was that last part, Steph?
Quality visual is huge.
Yeah. So I have these things called Newer light wands. It's Neewer on Amazon. Newer. Don't buy the old version. Buy the new version that has like a remote. There's like a new version of it that looks better. It looks better. Like it looks newer. The old version I'm having problems with. But yeah, you get the key to video. If you guys just want to know cheat code, key to video is lighting. That's basically it. So get your lighting down. Cheat code for the iPhone, cinematic mode. Get a tripod for your phone, and then you could set it to cinematic, and then you can even get a mirror, so where you could turn the phone, and then the mirror you could still see what the phone is seeing. You see what I'm saying? Because that front camera is 100 times better than the rear camera. But yeah, lighting is everything for video, though, for sure.
And can I just jump in and ask about, or ticky tack on that audio?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the key to audio is brand. It's not price. So if you see in this case, Audio Technica, Sennheiser, Rode, basically just Google top 10 microphone brands and then don't buy anything that's not from them.
Understood. Like work within what they offer.
Yeah, this microphone's $60. I don't even think they make this one anymore. I have, though, this is a $340 microphone that I do not use because this one will pick up the leaf blower a mile and a half away. So I use this one $60, but it's better, right? So if you're about to buy one too, you can DM me. And I have a list, but Steph, that maybe we can give them a microphone.
Next question from Chris Burns. Give us some tips on how to get more listeners.
Yeah, so I will also do a plug to my friends called getmorelisteners.com. That is their entire service. I help businesses create podcast content to drive more revenue. So that does not necessarily mean we need, quote unquote, more listeners. Sometimes it's literally just capturing the audience we already have. But to answer the question, if you want more listeners, you need to do things that get you more listeners, which is podcast SEO. So that means you do an analysis. You can use this site called OSHA. It's AUSHA. It's a search engine optimization tool for podcasting. So it shows you roughly, I don't know how accurate it is, but what people are searching on Spotify and Apple. Because let's just real quick look at that, right? If somebody goes to TikTok, they're not really looking for a recommendation for maybe a restaurant, right? Or something like that. Or like they want a top 10 best places in New Jersey to do this. If they're on YouTube, they're looking for instructions. They're looking for, this is how I set up my mic. First, I set up a mic. Then I plug in the XLR cord. Then I plug it into the thing. And then you have podcasts where they're looking for just casual, general conversation about a thing. So like they might go on Spotify and type in forestry podcast because they're into like forestry. Okay. They might type in mechanic podcast because they're a mechanic and they want to listen to other mechanics, right? So what you can do is you can optimize your podcast to appear in those search results. And you can do this with Google and YouTube too, which are the number 1 and 2 search engines in the world. So that's what we do to get more listeners. We do search engine optimization. I don't really go for listeners. I more so go for views. Like we optimize more so for YouTube. So for YouTube, I'm looking to rank on the first page. And so we have another strategy for that too. So that's just kind of a roundabout like intro to getting more listeners and viewers.
So Claudia said that she's been doing solo podcasting for a while, and she asked if you can have a mixed podcast of interviews and solo.
Absolutely. Just know that there is no solutions here, only trade-offs. So if people come for 30 interviews and they listen for 30 interviews and then you have a solo, nobody's going to knock on your door and be like, hey, what's up? Why'd you do this? Right? Nobody's going to be doing that. If they do, then man, that's a diehard listener right there. But so you're not going to like turn them off, but just know the numbers might be different, right? You may be attracting different people depending on the type of episode that you do. So that's where we get into the cultural podcasts, like, any influencer, right, that who has a podcast. A lot of times they're like sticking to this framework, right? The same type of interview, the Rogans, the Chris Williamson, the Stephen Bartlett, call her daddy, doesn't matter, you name it. They kind of stick into that formula because they literally cannot get less views. If they get less views, they don't make the same amount of money anymore and they lose their contract. So they're forced to stick with this formula, right? In our case, as if you're a business owner, I mean, I'm really using the podcast. I love the podcast side, but I'm really using it as a tool to reach people, right? So in that case, it's a little bit more lenient with the formats. Great question.
Right. Agreed. I like this next one as well. Jessica asked, what is the best way to name your podcast?
Yeah. So this
what should we consider?
Yeah. So this is a great one. Oh, and anytime. Thanks, Claudia. Appreciate it. Yeah. So what I always say is like, I'm not the arbiter of truth for podcasts. So I won't tell you to name it one thing over another thing, but I do give suggestions. For example, we have a law firm podcast that we just we're helping launch right now. They had like a few different name variations. And what I will do is if I have, for example, let's make it an easy business. Say it's podcasting, right? I could name my show the Ryan Sullivan Show. But within that, it tells you absolutely nothing about what's in that show. But if I name it Podcast Growth Secrets for Small Businesses, pretty obvious what's going on in that podcast. Now, if you go ahead and then click it and then it sucks, then you're obviously not going to come back. But there's things that you can use the name strategically, or you can be a little more cute and fun and name it kind of something more humorous or something a little bit more esoteric. And in that case, that's great. You might get a little chuckle when somebody sees the name, but you may be then losing your search engine optimization or your attractiveness of somebody to then go and click on it. So back to no solutions, just trade-offs.
Understood. If anyone has more questions, I'm just working my way down. And again, if anyone else wanted to jump on and speak, feel free. I'm going to open that up.
Yeah, come on. This is a podcast. This is one big podcast right now.
Yeah, so
hey, I'll jump in.
Chris Burns.
Hey, Ryan, thanks. Great webinar here. Love it. I'm just curious. You mentioned YouTube. Also, would love to hear some advice on what you do for YouTube SEO, because that seems like that's even more competitive than anything else these days.
Yeah, it's great. And appreciate you, Chris. And yeah, YouTube is brutal. I'm just going to say that right now. I've been doing YouTube on and off for 10 years. There's a lot of competition there, and a lot of it, I'll just say this. So what I have been told and instructed to do, if you want to reach a large quantity of people on YouTube, is the key is unique ideas, right? So it's an idea that another bakery wouldn't have, right? For example, or whatever. Like, we made the largest cupcake in the world. That's a great YouTube idea for a bakery, but then you have to go ahead and make the largest cupcake in the world, right? So if you want that quantity piece, that's that. Now, below that, or I would say the way that I'm looking to do it is I'm looking to attract hundreds of people, obviously thousands, but I'm just looking to attract my total addressable market, right? So the people that are searching for B2B podcasting or podcasting for business or how to grow business, how to grow a podcast for your business, or vice versa. So that's who I'm looking to attract, right? So in that case, I have like 1,200 subscribers. I get hundreds, sometimes thousands of views, and that's successful for me. People click on a call to action, or click on a lead magnet that I have in the description of the YouTube video, and then they hop on my email list, and now they're in my ecosystem, right? So, but in terms of, okay, how do we navigate YouTube? It's going to be way deeper than this conversation. But ultimately, if you want the keys, it's titles, thumbnails, and delivery. So it's title, thumbnail, hook, meaning the first minute, first 30 seconds to a minute, because it's YouTube. People have a little bit more time than your average TikTok that's 3 seconds. So it's title, thumbnail, hook, and then the delivery. So you can bring them in with the largest cupcake, but if technically the largest cupcake is only a foot tall, I'm not going to click off because I was expecting a 50-foot wide cupcake. So you still do have to give them that delivery. Good question, Chris. Appreciate you, man.
I have a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Ryan. Would it be best then to have like a main name and then a short description behind it so that everybody knows, what it's about?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So you can have, I don't even know what the limit is on in terms of how many like words you can have in your podcast title. But we've seen that work where you would have like, the podcast show, and then like an asterisk, and then a subtitle that's like taking your podcast from 0 to 100,000 downloads or whatever. So yeah, you could definitely do that for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And another question, would it be also beneficial to have a multi-channel podcast, let's say podcast on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on TikTok? I mean, so that you can reach a broader audience, or or even Facebook Live or Instagram Live?
Yes, I would say yes, it is good, but I would rather have one platform at 100% than have 10 platforms at 10% each.
Okay.
So what we do is we focus on YouTube. I make YouTube videos that go on YouTube. Then I make then the same video, but just an mostly uncut version, longer version, goes on the audio platforms with a custom intro and outro. Then I have clips. I make the videos in a way that they create short form clips that I then take those clips, post them on LinkedIn. But if I'm going to post them on Instagram, then it may be just a slightly different strategy. And ultimately, too, every platform's different. What works on YouTube Shorts might not work on TikTok, etc. So really, it's just a square peg, round hole thing. But what I always say is just pick a platform. If you have a dominant platform, you want to squeeze all the people from that platform and bring them to your podcast. So just focus on one at a time, because really what we're asking people to do here is listen to stuff for 30 minutes, or, watch a video for 15 minutes. That's a lot of time. So one post on Facebook and then another post 2 weeks later is not going to do it. You really got to build in that's why connecting the podcast so close to your business works so well, because then you can use it as most of your content, and it's selling your service and it's selling the podcast at the same time. So that's a great question, Claudia. Appreciate that.
Alicia?
Yeah. Are you suggesting that we pick either like, say, iTunes versus YouTube versus like other devices? Is what's your most recent comment?
Yeah. So what I would say, so these podcast platforms that you use to distribute your podcast audio version, they will distribute it to 25 plus platforms for free. If you want a free one, use Spotify for podcasters. That's free. Spotify for creators is what it's called now. That's free one. That will take your podcast and put it on all the audio platforms. So have that be your base, right? If you want to do YouTube too, that's okay. But now you're going to need a video editor. Now it's going to be a different piece of content, right? So if you want to make your life easy, you can just start with audio, get it on those 25 plus platforms. It's very easy to do. And then you could add video later. If you have if you have time, money, resources, everything, then do it all. Like do YouTube, do multi-platform, do audio. But if you want to just get started and you also don't want the fuss of, I don't know if my guest's video is going to be good or if they're going to have a webcam or whatever, then you could just get started with audio. And that's a great place to start.
Thank you. Speaking of getting started, So if you're new to this, right, now starting podcast, what would you advise, like the next thing to do?
Oh, well, start podcasting.
So
So,
just jump onto like Spotify and just,
well, I would
consider
know
it.
the recording piece. I would say definitely. So, listen, we have a program for this. We also have a program for small business owners too. That Steph, if I can, I'll talk about that a little bit. Yeah. So we have a program. So we've been an agency for a couple of years now, and it's been difficult to work with smaller businesses who obviously can't afford like a, agency retainer. And I'm not saying I can either. So what we did was we started a group coaching program. And that program is now $500 a year. And there's 25 plus hours of these type of workshops going through every single thing, everything from intro, outro, artwork, you name it. So that's what we did, because there was no one-stop shop to go, this is the question I would get. They would be like, what do I do next? And then I would say, well, here's our retainer. And they're like, well, I'm a small business. I can't afford this retainer. Okay, great. So we do have that. So I can share that link with you. It's actually a school community. So we have 20 people in there right now. But in terms of beyond that, in practicality, there is no podcast without the actual podcast. So the best thing you can do is choose the format. If you want, try 3 different formats. Try a solo, try a co-host with a friend, try an interview with somebody who's really easy to interview, somebody you know and like and trust already, and then just see how you like it, because ultimately you're going to have to do this hundreds of times. So you want to make sure that you do some testing before you actually go ahead and commit to it. Yeah, great questions, Alicia. Appreciate it.
And I think that touches on, on something that's come up a few times in a few different ways. I think another question from Lisa was like, on a small budget, where's the best place to upload a new podcast? I don't know if it's still Spotify for creators, as you said, since it does the free broadcasting, basically. And then where do you set up a podcast? That was another question.
Yeah.
And I wanted to throw in the question of the paywall, like Patreon and those sorts of platforms as well.
Yeah, great. So yeah, Spotify for podcasters, free. Everything that's free is not that good, right? It's trade-offs again. So just know, like, I don't use that, but the one I use is $20 a month. It's called captivate.fm. And I have an affiliate link for that too. I don't know if you mind, Steph, if I give them that, but yeah, so captivate.fm is what I use for the paid platform. And then Spotify for creators is the free. So there's really no excuse. Like either way, you still get it out there. And then obviously YouTube is free to upload, but you're going to upload separately. You're going to have your video version, YouTube, audio version, podcast platforms. Then what was the last one, Steph? It was.
I asked about Patreon and like the paywall.
Yeah. So it's coming back to do I get sponsors from my podcast? Well, if you're not a 7-figure, 8-figure, 9-figure business, I would say, no, don't get sponsors. Like just sell your own products more. And it's kind of the same thing for Patreon. Yes, maybe you will have 5 people paying $10 a month, but I mean, if you can have 100 people paying $20 a month, definitely do Patreon. That would make sense. But what we did was instead of having a Patreon, we started a group coaching program, and we did I did 5,000 in revenue the first week I started that, but I had an audience of 15,000 people. Right. So it just depends on your audience size. The thing that you don't want to do is make a Patreon and then nobody signs up. Right. So just make sure that you have the audience size to do that.
I think we answered a lot of the questions. Gina Marie had also asked what audio recording tool should we use if we're not doing video.
Okay.
You said brand over price, but I don't know. That was for microphones. This is audio recording tool. So I know that's slightly different, right?
Steph, is it cool if I put my affiliate link in the chat, or is that okay?
Yeah, if y'all could, I shared your LinkedIn so that folks could connect.
Oh, good. Okay, then they'll reach out to me there. All right, yeah, cool.
More, and if they have questions for any other referrals, I know you have a lot of different products and recommendations.
Yeah, I don't want to hit you with too many of them, but yeah, feel free to hit me up. I'll send you those. So yeah, what was the last thing you said?
Yeah, as we get closer to the audio recording tool.
Oh yeah,
a microphone and
yeah. So I would say Zen. So I use a program called Zencastr. But you'll notice if you start to look up podcast recording, a lot of platforms are going to come up. Zencastr, Riverside, Squadcast. Squadcast just raised their prices. Don't go with that one. Riverside is fine. Zencastr is good. anything, as long as it records stuff, basically you're good. I don't really care what you use. I just like the Zencaster one, and that's just what I use because it has like least amount of problems. None of them are perfect. People DM me every day. They go, "Oh my, what? The audio? I lost my guest audio." Yeah, that happens. You're recording a virtual podcast. Like stuff happens. So stuff is gonna happen. It's all good. Like I was recording a podcast this morning, and then randomly, my podcast started playing, and then it took me like a minute to figure out where it was coming from. Right. So things are going to happen. No platform is perfect, but I would recommend Zencaster would be my number one. And then Riverside is basically the equivalent to that too, if you like that one better.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think we've touched on each question.
Man, shout out to everybody here. That was awesome.
Yeah, right. I think the only other one I would ask is, because I like this one a lot, and I think it's the only one I missed, was what is the ideal length of time for a podcast?
So there is no ideal. The ideal length is as much time as it needs for you need to get through the information without adding anything extra. The average is 30 minutes. So the average podcast length is 30 minutes. My thing is this: play to your platform. You can't, if you want to put a 60-minute video on YouTube, YouTube loves that. YouTube wants you to have longer videos so you stay on their platform. But if people don't watch for that whole 60 minutes, or if they only watch for a minute, then YouTube's not going to suggest your stuff. So you got to play to the platform. I just gave up on that. I said, I'm going to do short videos on YouTube. That's my best chance to get people to watch. I'm going to do slightly longer podcasts. I'm going to do 15-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute podcasts. But in terms of our clients, no matter if it's a solo, a co-host, sometimes the interviews are a little bit longer, but the average for everybody seems to be around 30 minutes. That's a good question.
Right. I'm glad I didn't miss that one. It was in the middle of everything. So I really appreciate all the questions, all the activity here. And I hope that we can continue this energy into the next events with Ryan. It's going to be December 4th. And I believe I pinned it to the top of the chat. I don't get to see what's pinned. I can only pin it. So please let me know if you need me to share it again. Glad to do that. And
looks good.
Yes, we will have a recording. Be sure to stay connected in the Novo community group. That is also linked here. We talked about Novo as well, but if you're looking for a business banking platform, a business banking solution, we've got the link there for you to use Ryan's referral. But again, we'll have more opportunities to build on that and answer any questions. I'm happy to do that for you, especially in the Alignable group. So on that note, I think we can say peace and wish all of you well. And if you have anything else to add, again, you know where to find Ryan, podcastprinciples.com, and his LinkedIn is added here as well.
Thank you so much, Steph. Thank you to Novo, and thank you to all of you for listening in and tuning in on this one and interacting. You guys made it great. Thank you so much. I'll see you December 4th. Let's keep it cooking.